FERPA by Caitlin Rule. What is FERPA? FERPA is a federal law that protects the confidentiality of student education records. What are education records? The term education records is defined with certain exceptions, as those records are 1. Directly related to a student, or 2. Maintained by an educational agency or institution, or by a party acting for the agency or institution. It is also known that records on children with disabilities who receive evaluation, services, or other benefits under Part B of the IDEA are subject to IDEA's confidentiality of information requirements, in addition to being considered education records subject to FERPA. FERPA compliance in the digital age. Some advocates are calling for FERPA to be strengthened and more responsive to their cyber threats of today, including ransomware and data theft. As of September 2019, at least 10 school districts have been in the news for their own ransomware attacks. This includes students' full names, date of births, and home addresses, as well as other sensitive information such as health records, special education, referrals, and in some cases, biometric data such as fingerprints and facial scans. So FERPA has been weakened numerous times over the years through the regulatory changes, making it easier for schools to collect and share this data with large private corporations. FERPA was altered twice since the first passed in 1970s, creating exceptions to share information and student records with vendors without parent consent. In the past 4 years or so, discussions about strengthening FERPA to modernize and update the law has been more common. Confusion with FERPA. In the event of epidemic disease, outbreak, or a campus shooting, for instance, a school could legally share student education records with designated personnel and law enforcement officers. The report also claims that FERPA has become out of touch with modern classrooms in the digital age. So just like the last slide that I was talking about. Contrary to common misconceptions, the FCSS report reads, schools have a great deal of flexibility under FERPA to disclose student data and education records in certain settings. So in the context of school safety. FERPA for immigrants. Generally, SROs, or student resource officers, are not required to report undocumented students. However, there is a limited exception which could apply if the SRO is employed by your school district through the county local law enforcement and there exists an extraordinary circumstance involving public safety. But under FERPA, a school may disclose directory information, which does not include social security cards, without consent. But they are required to allow parents and eligible students a reasonable amount of time to request that the school not disclose directory information about them. Surveillance cameras with FERPA. Images of students captured on surveillance recordings qualify as education records when photo or video is directly related to a student and mandated by the educational institution or an entity acting for the school. Whether a recording is directly related to a student, it is a context-specific determination, considering the following factors that I have listed here. So moreover, surveillance recordings that are created and maintained by a school law enforcement unit are not education records and therefore not confidential. If, however, those records are provided to, then mandated by the school, they become education records. So sharing videos from surveillance cameras. School districts commonly receive requests from parents to view surveillance recording images if it's of their child. When a surveillance recording qualifies as an education record, That is when it's directly related to the student and is mandated by the educational institution. Then it must be disclosed to the parent of the student. Sometimes law enforcement asks for the surveillance recordings. So unless the recording is created and mandated by a school's law enforcement unit, therefore it does not qualify for FERPA, schools are prohibited from disclosing such records without having first secured written consent from the parents of the student. And sometimes there are third parties who ask for surveillance camera footage, like the media, citizen groups, and other third parties. So typically recordings that qualify as FERPA are accepted from the disclosure requirements of open record laws. So to ensure your school is FERPA compliant, 1, raise FERPA awareness. 2, confirm that FERPA applies to you. 3, know the rights, protections, and exceptions. 4, choose compliant vendors. 5, train all school employees. 6, implement compliant policies and procedures. 7, encrypt files and emails. 8, implement other prevention tools. So sometimes schools might unintentionally violate FERPA. In the instance of there could be vendors, schools are responsible for what their vendors do with their data. Parents own the FERPA rights of their children under the age of 18 or enters a post-secondary institution. Higher education institutions can choose to release a student's education records to both parents, provided that at least one parent claims the student as a dependent for tax purposes. Sometimes there are fights. If a teacher witnesses an incident, such as a fight on school grounds, he can talk to, say, other parents or the press about what he saw, but if the principal reads a report about the same incident, she can't talk about it publicly. More of those could be grades. A teacher can share a student's grades with the registrar or contact the counseling office with concerns about the student's mental health without consent. Although not illegal, it's possibly best not to share such sensitive information over email, which is not the most secure method of communication. Then we have social media. So an inappropriate disclosure to just one person and an inappropriate disclosure to thousands of people in social media are both FERPA violations. And then there's students. If a student denies access to student records to a parent of a student under the age of 18, that's a FERPA violation. It's also a violation to deny the student access to his own records. Surveys, questionnaires. The PPRA requires that parents provide written consent before students are given surveys conducted by the U.S. Department of Education and supported by federal funds. The laws govern surveys, analysis, and evaluations that include questions on these following topics I have listed here. What happens if an educational institution is found to be a violation of FERPA? Well, that institution may be cut off from federal funding. This would be an extreme case and has not yet been implemented in FERPA's 30-year history. More likely, the FERPA office would require the school district to document and implement a policy and procedure and ensure that similar violations do not occur in the future. So FERPA should operate effectively and efficiently to enable the resolution of compliance as quickly as possible. Ideally, this should occur within a short period of time after filing the complaint. But what can parents do if they feel like their FERPA rights or their child's FERPA rights were violated? The only option available for parents under FERPA is to file a complaint with the Family Policy Compliance Office to the U.S. Department of Education. So they're responsible for investigating, processing, reviewing, and adjudicating violations and complaints. So unfortunately, hearings are only conducted in the region offices. All the other functions performed from the Washington, D.C. office. Data instruction. FERPA does not provide any specific requirements for educational agencies and institutions regarding disposition, or destruction of the data they collect or maintain themselves, other than requiring the safeguard FERPA. Data in any of their forms move through stages during their useful life and ultimately are either archived for later use or destroyed when their utility has been exhausted. So then I have my USD 437 FERPA policies. There was any student data submitted to and maintained by a statewide longitudinal student data system shall only be disclosed in accordance with the Student Data Privacy Act. Disclosure of all other student data or student record information maintained is governed by the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, which is FERPA. It also said that release of information, the FERPA rights, unless the information collected from the student is designated as directory information. No information gathered about students shall be released to the third parties without express written consent of the parent or eligible student. Then there was one about website rules, and website rules shall include data, privacy, and FERPA regulations. And I have my resources.